Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sparring Partners. I'm Monica Paulini, your host, and my guest today is Nick Johnson, an independent telecom consultant whom I've known for decades now. A long time. We don't need to count the years. And he was at IP Access, which he founded, and then we continue to keep in touch through different things in life. Today, what we're talking about is something that neither of us is really an expert, but it's something we care about, which is CALEA or illegal intercept. And this might surprise you because it's not a topic that people talk about much these days. And so we're going to talk about, first of all, why should we care? What is going on, and what should we think about it to improve it or to deal with it, or what is the future hold? So, Nick, welcome to the podcast. It's a long time that you should have been here on the podcast before, but here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Monica. I appreciate it.
So tell us what you're up to these days, because I know you're having a lot of fun.
So, I'm consulting independently in the area of telecoms, as you may have noticed. So, yeah, IP Access was a long and wild ride. Started in 2000. Small cell pioneer, femtocell. Yeah, we were building GSM small cells before they were even called small cells. Up to and went through the whole residential femto experience with AT&T, and then ended up with being acquired by Mavenir in 2000 in the middle of COVID. And so we've since then really been really exploring a wider space, I think. So I led the UK TIN for a year or so, which was quite exciting and quite informative, really, seeing how policy kind of butts up against technology. It was kind of an interesting time to see more of that, see more of the age of government really in close up and how it works with telecoms. And so, yeah, so since then, really just been keeping my ear to the ground, I would say, in terms of what's going on. Other usual stuff, doing other things I've always wanted to do. I'm quite a keen rower, you may know, so I did a coaching qualification for that. Do a lot of that in my hometown of Ely, which is on the river. So do a bit of schools coaching, a bit of adult coaching and the club and so on. So yeah, lots of stuff. Stuff I'd put off for most of my career, and now I've actually got the free time to do it. And then, podcasts from time to time. So it's going to be...
Including podcasts, which are probably haven't done that much a long time ago. It's a new thing. Okay, so we're talking about CALEA. So what got you into this? Which is obviously not the thing you've done most of your life, because that...
Yeah, indeed. So it was... so when we first engaged with T-Mobile, our first scale customer at IP Access was T-Mobile in the US, and they, obviously there are technical requirements, the 3GPP requirements, FCC requirements, safety and so on. But there's a whole bunch of statutory requirements that go alongside that, and one of those is lawful intercept in the US. That's called CALEA, and communications assistance for law enforcement agencies. And of course and pretty much the requirements are more or less the same around the world as I understand them. and back then it was really a burning issue, right? If you had to have when you're doing mobile telephony, and it was mainly voice then, you had to be able to provide a lawful intercept function to the appropriate authorities when they needed it, right? And you tested, your equipment and its compliance to that requirement was tested thoroughly before you could be deployed in the network. And since then, over the intervening 20-odd years, seems to my mind at least to have faded from view. That whole thought of lawful intercept just doesn't get talked about in the same way. And so I'm kind of curious about why that is, and why we are tolerant now of messaging services which are end-to-end encrypted, which allow conversation to happen in complete darkness. There's no, if law enforcement has a warrant on a particular individual, there's no way they can actually say what's going on in those conversations, as far as I understand it today. And I'm curious why that is, and how that emphasis has disappeared over the years in favor of another important factor, of course, is privacy, our own personal professional privacy. No one wants people eavesdropping on their private conversations, but on the other hand, if there is suspicion of wrongdoing that's enough to allow a warrant, a judge to issue a warrant, and should that not have the ability to serve that in a effective way, so that the conversations can be monitored and appropriate action taken. So why is that? Why has that disappeared?
Yeah, it is. I think it's a big change because way back then, I remember that the conversation was how do we make sure that what we used to have before, which is just listening in when people were talking on the phone, that was intercept. I mean, and it was a voice channel. We wanted to preserve that kind of functionality as we moved to IP. And that was the main thing. So yeah, there was, people knew what encryption was or whatever, but there was not so much emphasis in the fact of the privacy of the conversation, because we were used to the fact that, yeah, you knew that if you talk on the phone, police might be listening in if they have a good reason to do that, the authorization. So it's not like everyday kind of thing. But then over the, I would say that over the last 20 years, there was a shift, a complete shift, where what really became most dominant, is the fact that we are entitled to have everything to be private to us. And therefore, encryption is the way to ensure that. So if everything is encrypted, nobody has access to it. I can tell you whatever I want and nobody will know about it. And on the face of it, if you are honest and just talking about your private issues that you just want to have you want to be confidential because you want to say something you don't want other people to say, which you're, that sounds perfectly legal. However, I did actually change my mind a little after listening to a podcast about pedophiles. And then basically, and it's not just pedophiles, but if you want to do something illegal, what you do is that you use a channel that is encrypted. But at that point, it was Signal, but now everything is. So it is true that at one level, encryption protects legal and honest, just confidential conversation, but also covers up for criminal activity. Right? It just does both because it just covers everything. And so what should we think about it? So what I used to think is like encryption is a good thing no matter what. Now I'm like, well, really? Or you should be able to encrypt it, but somebody should be able to have access. So like with the intercept or other access is only if you need to have access. So not everybody can have access. So maybe that is the shift. Do you agree with that? That it's just like we went the other way. So maybe you do have, well, you can intercept to some extent, but it's not as important, or maybe not enforced.
Yeah, I think the whole ability to intercept. I think what you see happening now when something bad happens and the police get involved is that people's phones get impounded, or their laptops and so on. So you're looking for evidence at the edge of the network, at the endpoints, and you can't find it in the middle. You can't find it and you can't find it as it's happening at the middle. So it's only after the event that you can get hold of people's laptops and break into them, and with lawful authority break into them and get the evidence you need. And so I'm curious that, is that a conscious shift in law enforcement policy, or is it actually a sort of unconscious drift away from the things we used to be able to do, that and that people are just, is it just become too hard? I mean, we were discussing earlier, the technology exists at current levels of encryption, with certain key exchange, as channels become encrypted, the cipher keys are exchanged, and there is the ability to insert keys into that exchange, if you have the appropriate network architecture to allow you as an authorized man in the middle to actually listen in on that conversation. I don't think it's actually that easy, but it's doable, and but I don't think it happens. And I'm, I don't know. I mean, as I say, I'm coming at it from a network vendor point of view, network equipment vendor point of view. Why do I need to build my equipment to meet these requirements anymore, or can I just ignore them? And it looks like, when you browse around to find out the answer to that question, you see, in the US at least, the FBI still has one of its sub websites. There's a website all about CALEA and lawful intercepts and the requirements, the specifications you have to comply with to meet that. And the telcos still obliged to comply with those CALEA requirements. Are the other service providers, the non-telco service providers, are they required to meet them? I don't know, and I don't think so. And are we okay with that? I think we sort of have just drifted into, it's probably just too hard to do anything else. I don't know.
Well, I guess it's kind of a difficult discussion in a way to have, because if you are so much into the encryption side, or like, protecting privacy, then obviously you're going to be less interested in this other part, which is obviously encroaches with privacy at some point. Because even if the police has a good reason to go and look at what you do, clearly that limits your expectation of privacy. And so the question is that, I guess as a society, how do we deal with that? Are we okay? And I think that, as you say, maybe we're not even asking the question.
I'm not sure. I mean, certainly, when you look at the market position that these companies take, end-to-end encryption is incredibly important. They promote it right up front. There is no one's listening, not even us. As a
yes. I mean, this is all I you've seen, and I guess that if you are an equipment vendor, as you were, maybe that's good news, because you have to do less work.
Exactly. Yes. So there's.
I mean, there is just one less check.
One less requirement.
Yeah, and for an operator as well.
It was a big deal. I mean, there was a, I think that's when we were doing this compliance testing in T-Mobile US, there was this event in Moscow, which, where the Chechen separatists invaded a theater in Moscow, and it was a really bad situation. 900 odd people were held captive, and 100 odd of them died in the rescue attempt, and it was a terrible, terrible situation. And the hearsay at the time was that, one of the reasons why it went so badly wrong was that the Russian operators at the time had no ability to eavesdrop the conversations between the separatists who had invaded the theater. And I don't know if that's true or not, but the story that emerged about the rows between the FSB and the Russian operators, and the fact they weren't able to listen into those conversations and understand where people were within the theatre and so on, and how to best plan a rescue mission, really just threw that into high relief. That actually, well, crikey, if we can't, how important that was, if to a sort of basic law and order, to have that ability seems so incredibly important, back then, and yet has sort of just, well, I guess we don't really, we're okay just to impound people's phones after the event and
And
take it.
hope that
Yeah.
everything is still there. Because if I'm a criminal, I mean, I'm just gonna clean wipe
Well,
my
yeah,
phone every other day. I mean,
you're gonna flush your phone down the toilet, aren't you? Or
yeah,
some
I
other
mean, that's
equally
what I would do.
inaccessible place. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like the obvious thing is that the people I talk to, but then even them, well, anyway. But now that I think about it, did CALEA ever work? Because maybe the reason why we do not talk about, because I remember that at the time there was a question of like, okay, we have to do all of this, but then everybody was complaining that it wasn't working, that it was probably was really hard to do. Maybe it never worked. I wonder. I never, I know. I guess it's because it kind of went off the radar, and
Well,
maybe it went off the radar because it didn't work. Could that be?
well, maybe I guess that possibly. I mean, well, we passed our compliance testing, so it. I have to. I kind of. I took from that the fact it had actually worked. So, um, it's. It maybe it became so difficult that law enforcement got fed. Maybe the whole process of getting a warrant from a
Yeah, yeah.
judge on an individual and actually serving that warrant on a telco and getting that telco to comply, and then getting all maybe that whole process became so burdensome
Mhm.
that maybe they just stopped using it. I don't know. I mean, I think technically it worked, but maybe, as you say, maybe it
Yeah.
just did. Practically, it didn't work because
Yeah,
it.
I mean, not that the technology wasn't working, but the whole kind of system, so to say,
Yeah, yeah,
anyway, but okay, so there is a case to be made, at least, or at least I make that case, is that we need intercept. We need legal intercept because that's really important to know, to prevent. Security is still an issue, and so we want to know what's going on, whether it's voice, text, or whatever, and legal authority needs to have access to it. So if that is the case, however, how do we do that in the current situation where the operators really are managing the infrastructure, but not the applications over which
yeah,
that
yeah.
communication. So if you have a WhatsApp kind of situation, which is pretty common, or it doesn't have to be WhatsApp, by the way, it could be anything. So, but you
Other
have,
messaging services do
yeah, we
exist.
have not
Yeah,
even a messaging, but because a lot of applications have kind of
yeah. You
messaging
can do you can
capability.
do real-time
Yeah,
telephony as
yeah.
well. Yes.
But it is an entity that is completely separate from the network. And in fact, WhatsApp works on every network, every country. So,
Yeah.
well, almost every country. So you have the operator that is in control of the infrastructure, but does not have by definition access to the
Yeah.
content.
Yeah.
And then you
I mean,
have all this myriad of applications. So if somebody is doing something illegal, God knows what they're using.
yeah,
Because before, if I make a phone call, it would be through the operator, so there would be only one point that you'd have to
yeah,
check.
yeah,
And now it
yeah.
could be anything. So how should we think about legal intercept in that kind of environment?
Well, you're right. Identifying the endpoint is a key step in the legal process, right? You can't be indulging in mass surveillance of. Or
Yeah.
I think the suspect is part of this group over here of 5,000 people on a university campus. Let's just
Mm-hmm.
collect all of their phone calls and
Yeah.
messages and emails
Yeah.
and blah blah. We'll sift through them later and find the evidence we need. That's not allowed. It's just disproportionate, I think is the phrase that's
Mm-hmm.
used, disproportionate surveillance. And you're right, from a telco point of view, they've lost sight of the endpoints of the conversation because it all happens over a data channel. And one end of that data channel is Google's network, or the messaging service provider network. And the other end is the application in the phone. It's not even in the phone, the application in the phone. The application talks through a data bearer that's part of the telco, but then comes out the other end of the telco into the application service provider. Dean Bubbly hates this phrase, but it is literally over the top, right? It is that is, and so it's no longer, the telco no longer has the information it needs to invoke an intercept point. You can't actually say, well, because you don't know who the endpoints are. And you need that to properly comply with the regulations. So the people who you would have thought now have that obligation are the application service providers, whether that's Signal or Telegram or even FaceTime or Meta or whoever is providing that service. They know who the endpoints are, and the CALEA should be incumbent upon them. It should be incumbent on them to comply with CALEA. But I don't know if it is or not. I trawled through some documents that I could find, but I didn't think it. I didn't think it obliged them to comply with CALEA.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody listening to this can correct me and point me in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that because there is so much emphasis in making sure that the app or whoever the players are do not respect privacy of the users, then obviously there is by necessity less of a tendency to say, well, we know it all, because obviously that would just then you create a real problem in terms of messaging, if nothing else. So how is everything going to change now with AI and quantum? So I was just reading, I just came across something that basically AI can look at the statistical properties of the signal and basically infer what you're doing. So, well, if it's Netflix, you can have a good guess of what it is. But if you don't know, you just look at the nature of traffic. You should be able to. So you can decrypt it, but you can get a little bit of information, and then eventually you could imagine a situation where, yes, AI allows you to encrypt better, but also allows you to break encryption better, or whatever. But there is a sense in which, both with AI and with quantum, this whole idea of how you can actually do it, or how you can stop it, might change.
It might, and so I mean so let's think about quantum first. So quantum, if you believe that quantum computers will come along soon enough, and so-called Shor's algorithm will be effective in allowing you to break into AES encoded, also AES ciphered secure channels, then you could imagine that in due course that would allow you to intercept messaging as it happens. But of course, people are already responding to that and putting in new technologies, quantum key distribution and so on, other things which allow you to distribute quantum safe keys to encrypt your channels more securely, so that quantum computers can no longer decrypt them, and also to provide a level of authentication so that if your message has been interfered with or decrypted and re-encrypted, you will know about it. There's some a little bit like, I mean, the way I'm hearing it talked about, and there's an awful lot of popular language in this field, but the way I'm reading it is that this well-known thing about, with a quantum system, as soon as you measure something in a quantum system, you've changed it, right? You measure the position, you change it. That means you've changed the momentum. You measure the momentum, you've changed the position, and you're no longer certain of it. So if you've measured a quantum encoded message, then you've changed it, right? So in a way that can be detected by the receiver. So it's kind of made the whole lawful intercept thing much harder, right? Because now there's no way of actually intercepting a message that's been encoded in a QKD way, in a way that the endpoints can't tell you. That's one of the requirements of lawful intercept, is that the people you're intercepting, the conversation you're intercepting, can't tell that they're being intercepted.
Yeah.
Quantum cryptography takes away that ability, almost from the ground. So, the quantum itself seems to make this whole problem even harder. And yeah, so are there any features being built in by under the hood that we don't really know about it that allow that to happen, where your quantum keys are being distributed in a way that actually mean that they're not really quantum keys, they're actually just keys that actually it's still the possibility of inserting a tap in the middle of the conversation, with some keys that you as a lawful interceptor have provided that allow you to intercept that conversation. That seems kind of plausible, but I think there's a lot of technical detail
Yeah.
there to be.
But you'd imagine that it would be possible, because if there are keys that, there should be keys that are only available to whatever legal entities can do it, and then maybe they need to eventually tell the people involved that they've been intercepted after the fact. Because obviously, in a way, you say, well, you should you should authorize someone to, I mean, like the police to do it. But if I know that my phone is intercepted, even if I'm completely clear and not doing anything criminal, I just toss it and get a new phone. I mean, just because I don't want to be, even though I think it's a good thing.
There's just always an arms race
Yeah.
here between
Yeah, so that's interesting, but you're right. I've never heard of that, and it has to be possible that you have some sort of different levels. That it's not like everybody can get the key, but
I don't know. I mean,
but I guess it's not a priority. But then again, maybe we come from an age where you have a phone and you have voice and you intercept. But if you go and look back in the day when we didn't have phones, if I would tell you something, it would be just me and you knowing about it. If we are like there's nobody around, and if there is somebody around, it's just physically there and present, which is actually not that different from the police getting your phone and looking at it, right? In fact, it was even worse, because at that point, so maybe it's the kind of thing that we're reverting back to what it used to be, that there was privacy simply because there was no way to record it. So you can go and say, if I tell you something, you can go and say the whole world what I told you, but it's your word against mine. There is no physical record.
And if there's you can't actually record your content of the conversation, but you know that your two suspects have been speaking together, are in the same position at the same location, same time. They've been talking, and I guess that takes us on to the whole AI thing, right? If your AI software is telling you something about who is calling who, even though you don't know what's actually being spoken about, and I don't know how you generate the training data for this particular AI function, but if you're inferring from the fact who is calling who and when that's in relation to what criminal activity, then I guess there's quite a few startups popped up. There's a few in the news, aren't there? Where some fairly highly valued software companies that have that as part of their mission statement, is to use AI to give you that that sort of probable cause kind of factor that you need to then escalate through other stages of law enforcement. And I don't know. I can't say. It feels kind of a little bit like profiling, in the sense that what if you're training this engine on stuff that it could be training your prejudices into this engine quite easily. Certain types of people meeting with certain other types of people in certain locations. Then you're sort of I don't know. It doesn't feel very safe right now, but with that caveat in mind, I can imagine that would start to happen. You would use your AI engine to infer what's going on between endpoints, even if you don't really know what's going on in the traffic. As you say, like it was in the old days, where you just follow someone and see who they met, and take it from them.
Okay, our time is up, but this is very interesting conversation. I think it's a lot of food for thought, and actually, I think both of us welcome if there is anybody in the audience that have any more specific information. And you know why I think this was interesting is because, well, it's an interesting topic. But most of the time you try to do a podcast on whatever everybody talks about. And we did exactly the opposite this time around, right? We talked about something that we have not hearing people talk about. And I think that this is the same thing that you have when you have published papers, scientific papers, that you don't publish a paper if you have negative results. And that's really a bad problem for science, because the negative result is just as important as a positive one.
It's valuable.
Yeah. But people don't like to talk about it. So we did in some way the same thing, because we called attention, I think, on something that we both consider to be very important, and yet it is just faded out.
Deafening silence. Yes. Yeah.
And so we should think about 6G. This is the anti-6G topic. 6G, everybody knows what 6G is. Well, everybody thinks that they know what 6G is about, but actually there is no definition. CALEA, we know exactly what it is, but nobody's talking about. So I think that this was an excellent one. So maybe we should think another topic, another non-hot topic. So Nick, so much. It was so much pleasure to talk to you today, and I hope people in the audience enjoyed it as much as I did.
Good, thank you, Mikey. I enjoyed it too, but I appreciate it, and thanks to the audience for sticking with it. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, as always. Thank you to the audience. That's why we can have so much fun, is because you're out there listening to us. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.